far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100 women growing strong. 100 women where you belong. You stood tall and now you see, you have reached your destiny. Woman, woman.
As people of African descent, we offer this land recognition in solidarity with the indigenous peoples of Turtle Island in the efforts and deliberate intentions toward decolonization. As people of African descent, we acknowledge the land of Turtle Island that sustains us, express deep gratitude to its indigenous peoples, and pledge to honor our dignity and divinity that ultimately connects us all. By Kay Johnson. Welcome to 100 ABC Fireside Chats. 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women is a bold project initiated by co-authors and co-founders, the Honorable Dr. Jean Augustine, Dr. Denise O'Neill Green, and Donna Jones Simmons. Our mission is to celebrate and archive the professional accomplishments of trailblazing Black women from all across Canada. The goal is to create an ever-expanding database available for current and future generations via print media, public and private libraries, as well as our website, which is www.100abcwomen.ca. In addition to our fireside chats on topics that matter to our communities, such as education, healthcare, entertainment, creative arts, trade union, and so much more, we offer biennial book launching galas and biannual symposiums. The co-authors and co-founders would like to take this opportunity to thank each of you for attending today's fireside chat. We know that you will find these sessions educational and inspirational. So sit back, relax, and hear from our brilliant and talented honorees.
Welcome to Season 3 of the 100 Accomplished Black Canadian Women Fireside Chats. Today, on this Sunday, May 26, 2024, we're offering up Fireside Chat number 19. Our topic today is understanding the education system through an anti-racism lens. We're going to explore ideas about how to nurture the Black child from preschool to primary to secondary school, about why Black children receive harsher discipline than other children, about what Black children need and what schools need to change. How do we advocate for Black children to have a fair chance at achieving success in the Ontario education system? Well, I know I'm really looking forward to this conversation today with our two esteemed panelists who bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to the topic, from their long-standing dedication to confronting anti-Black racism in education and to nurturing Black children in Ontario schools. So let me begin by introducing our panelists. Kathy McDonald is a wife and mother to 4 change makers who has resided in Brampton for nearly 30 years. Kathy's also known as the General and has been revolutionizing the education system and works towards dismantling anti-Black racism in education within Ontario and Canada. She currently serves as a school trustee, a school board trustee for the Peel District School Board, representing Brampton Wards 3 and 4, and is the inaugural chair of the Black Trustee Caucus of the Ontario Public School Board Association. She's the recipient of numerous awards, including the 2021 Harry Jerome Award, and was a 2022 100 ABC Women honoree. Welcome, Kathy.
Thank you for that kind introduction.
I would like to also welcome our other panelist, Tiki Mercury Clark. She is a song stylist, singer, pianist, storyteller, lyricist, composer, writer, and public speaker with a 50-plus year professional career span. She is a self-proclaimed wipeapologist. Okay, for those of you who don't know, the urbandictionary.com definition of wipeapologist is, I think I'm pronouncing that correctly, it's a humorous slang for someone, usually a Black person, who studies white people, also known as white people. Tiki is a blood mother of 1 child and a spirit mother of more. Welcome, Tiki. So I thought I should also, as the moderator, give a small introduction of myself so that my panelists, so that you can both have an understanding of my frame of reference and my entry point on the topic of our panel today. So I see my work as part of a tradition of Black women artists, performers, educators, activists, scholars, and spiritual practitioners concerned with cultural reclamation, social justice, and freedom. As an independent artist educator working in Ontario for 35 years, and currently as a TDSB education partner, I have developed a repertoire of African diasporic curriculum that I've delivered in hundreds of schools, reaching thousands of learners. So let's begin. Kathy, if I may, I would like to begin with you.
Thank you.
Now you have spoken about, you put forward a question that I think is important for us to consider to begin. Do you believe that we should prepare children to deal with anti-Black racism at school? And if yes, what would you say is the best time to do it?
So I absolutely believe that you should prepare Black children to deal with anti-Black racism in schools. And I think those preparation should start from the moment you have decided that your child is going to enter a learning institution and leave the safety of your home environment. Because there's always a lot of focus, actually it's like hyper focus on secondary students when it comes to anti-Black racism. But I think the system fails to understand the importance of dealing with the issue the moment our babies walk into these learning institutions, because that's when the assault starts on our babies. And a lot of people feel that since little ones often, they don't have the language, they can't necessarily articulate clearly the trauma or what they're feeling, you know, it's often overlooked and dealt with way later than it should be. And I think there's a famous quote, and it talks about the ease of sort of healing a broken child as opposed to a broken man, right? Or a broken woman. And I think it's crucial that we concentrate more efforts on the early years, because that's really when it starts, right? Yeah.
So you're speaking about as early as pre-K, do you think?
Absolutely. Yep. Because even with in my experience as a trustee, even with our education partners, because for example, those early before and after school programs, they're not run by, usually not run by board staff, right? They are external partners. And if we are allowing and giving space to external vendors to come into our schools, and in essence, they're taking care of our children before they actually start school, right? Then we should ensure that the service, so the couple hours in the morning before they come, they're not already having a trauma-filled morning, coming angry and upset to try and now learn, right? We have some partners, even before they enter junior kindergarten or senior kindergarten, and they have children. Eventually, these children are going to become children. So most of them will become students in some board, right? So yes, you have kids that are homeschooled, but most kids are not. So eventually, even in preschool programs, they're entering some board or another, right? You have some that will go in private schools. And again, and that's not to say that you don't have racism in private schools too, but the majority of students are coming into public boards of education. So I think that the simple things and simple traumas that, and I say simple in quotation, because many people might tell you, for example, they go to the park and their little black child wants to play with another kid, right? From even before kindergarten stages, and you have parents dragging away their children, right? You have situations where in some of these early childhood centers, the kids talk about being isolated, or parents talk about, watching. Some of them you can even watch on, they have these live feeds, and parents say they just see their kid all alone. Nobody's playing with them. There's no adult encouraging other kids to play with them, and often, yes, you go in and have to have a conversation with them. But what about the parents that don't have the luxury of a daycare that has those live videos where you can kind of peep in from time to time? And parents have to do their job, they have to work, right? So they tell you, oh, it's just that one time when you zoomed in. So now do parents have to spend their whole working hours looking on their feed to ensure that their child is being included and made to feel welcome, right? And the same thing in before and after care. There are often reports of discrepancies. So parents may come to me to complain about the treatment, but I have to remind them it's really a third-party vendor. And I will flag it at the board that this particular vendor at this particular school appears to be having issues with Black children or with racialized children, depending on what the case is. And, it's something that as boards, we need to pay attention to monitor even our external vendors, right, that we bring in to service our kids.
Okay, so you've explained how you may hear from a parent about an incident that then you would have to notify the school, and so what can we do? What can be done? What can we put in place before these incidents occur? Um, could you suggest, some ways to, how do we sensitize these third-party vendors? What kind of, mechanisms can we put in place in the schools to prepare them so that they can better receive our Black children?
So I think it's crucial that as a board, because we're allowing parties to come in, for example, if we are going to get a call for proposal for somebody to build a school, right? We wouldn't just let any person say, hey, I'd like to build one of your schools. We do our due diligence. We have to ensure, for example, that the firm that's doing the bidding is qualified to, in fact, build, you know, a 1-story or 2-story school structure that will stay standing for a couple of 100, even at least 100 years or more to come, right? We just would. So you do due diligence on, you know, a lot of other things. So I think we have to do due diligence when it comes to people's children, right? So if you're a service provider, we need to ensure, and we can, for example, do you have feedback from the public? There's a Better Business Bureau. There are our parents ourselves, right? Our boards questioning and surveying parents to find out about their experience at these before and after school programs. Do we have, so a lot of boards, for example, are moving to, oh, you know, equity and you know, DEI. Are we looking at our partners and ensuring that they are, in fact, equitable organizations, right? Are we looking at the staff they're hiring, right? Are we going in to check and see, you know, is everything okay with the children in there, right? And I know at a glance, people might think, well, it's not our job to police and regulate, you know, the industry. But I would say, yes, it is our job to ensure that our students are in safe environments, because we are allowing people to come into our buildings to take care of our children before school. So I do think that boards have some role to play to ensure that the people that are providing these programs, right, are doing a proper service to all kids. And I say all kids because it's easy, you know, it's often easy to say, oh, they treat a certain group of kids well. But I think we need to dig beyond it. Are all kids treated well, right? How are kids with disability? I remember seeing about probably a month ago on social media where there was a little child in a wheelchair that was just isolated and left alone, not participating in a play or a song, like a concert that was happening, you know, things like that, right? Should not be tolerated. You know, are you including, does everybody feel included, right? Does everybody feel valued? What messages are you giving to the children? How are they treated? How are you distributing, you know, your treats? You'd be surprised to know, right? That you'd think that, in my experience, I can tell you, there are cases where you have people that withhold snacks from hungry children. And you say, how on earth could that happen? But it does happen, right? So if you don't have any compassion for children that look like you and I, when they said they are hungry, it won't move you, right? So you just figure, oh, I'm not setting a precedent, right? And these are words that have been said, that I don't want to set a precedent. I'm thinking, how can you, as a principal, you don't want to set a precedent that we feed hungry children? We have food programs, and you're withholding food from a hungry kid because you think they're going to come back the following day for food. And so what if they came back every day for food? We have the food, right? And I think as a learning institution, yes, we're about education, but there are many other factors that are important to ensuring that our kids learn. And I'm so excited that there was announcement about a national food program, and I'm excited to see how that's going to roll out. But I mean, you know, and schools are not only strictly ABCs and 1, 2, 3s, right? For school, some people, it's a safe haven. We are social workers. We are, you know, sometimes just comforters. And even if you look at the oath that teachers take, teachers are supposed to be parents in absentia, right? Which means when you send your kids there, the parents are not there. So you take an oath to treat children like a parent would, right? So, you know, you look at sometimes you say, would you treat your own child like that? And I think we have to go back to the, I guess, the duty that as adults, as educators, that we have. And we're a service industry. That's another thing people fail to realize. We're a service industry, right? And I know a lot of times people say, what about the parents? But I truly believe, regardless of what type of parent that you are, because kids at the end of the day, they don't get to choose their parents, right? I believe that as a educational institution, we have a duty to educate all parents, all students. So even if your parent is a keener, wonderful, involved parent, and even if you have an absentee parent, right? And I truly believe that, we need to really remember that as educators, we're part of a service industry.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So I know we have a lot of, there's this whole movement now with EDI, DEI, education for educators, for staff and teachers. There are, offices in ministries and boards of education that are equity, anti-oppression, anti-racism offices that schools can turn to if they need support in addressing these kinds of discriminations against Black children from staff, from teachers. How effective do you feel that these systems are in addressing these inequities that we're seeing?
Well, currently, I don't think they're very effective because I don't think that the accountable, because nothing, in my opinion, is going to be very effective until you have strong accountability measures. And I think throughout the whole system, we need to hold the students accountable. We also need to hold the staff accountable, right? And I think currently we're seeing what I would call the glossy poster syndrome, where we have these wonderful rollouts and posters and all these plans and frameworks, right? And, a lot of it is just basically the same framework reframed, right? But then there's no accountability. So if you don't have any accountability, right? And a lot of times too, we don't have the parents holding us accountable, right? Sometimes the parents aren't informed. Sometimes, and I think often, which is the case, they're so frustrated because it's almost as if the system is designed to frustrate parents when they try to complain and try to get something resolved. And it's almost like a brotherhood protecting, right, each other. So it's really hard to hold systems accountable without the political will. And, unfortunately, I think when it comes to anti-Black racism, it's not the most pressing political priority, right? And I think as a community, we need to ensure, because when I even think of, this George Floyd, summer of George Floyd, and I remember participating in a panel and, it was basically, is this a movement or is this a moment, right? And to me, the only way this whole so-called George Floyd, summer of George Floyd, will shift from being a moment to a movement is by us holding people accountable and not settling for the status quo. And I think people know what to do if they were truly serious about dismantling anti-Black racism, because it's not that quite complicated, right? And I look at things like child abuse, for example, right? Nobody now would walk into the middle of a busy square and start just strapping a kid with a belt, because they know that you'll go to prison, your kid will probably be taken away. There are strong accountability measures, right? Mm-hmm. So it's the same way, and especially if, as a Black person, because they may look the other way for other people, but if they see, a Black man beating a child in public, right, they're not looking the other way. So, and they shouldn't, but I'm just saying they will hold people accountable when they want to hold people accountable. And I think that when it comes to anti-Black racism in education, there is not that deep will across all levels of government to hold people accountable for the trauma that's happening to our children. And even with our children, it's easy for people to just say, oh, look at them, oh, they are violent or they are bad, right? And these are comments that I've been told as a trustee, right? In terms of looking at the root cause. So a child has come to school, has been stopped 3 times by 3 different police officers along the way. So he's late, he comes late, the principal is yelling and screaming at him, he loses it, and we wonder, why is little Dwayne angry, right? And we don't look at what he had to navigate just to come to school and get an education. We look at, kids that you see teachers would say, oh my goodness, Emily, you're such a strong advocate. You're so, well-spoken and can advocate for yourself. But when a Black child says or advocates for themselves, they're rude, they're disrespectful, they're loud, right? They're angry, right? And these are what we're navigating, and nobody calls it out, right? You look at promotion processes in education, and rules change when it's time for the Black person to get a promotion. It doesn't, right? You see that it's important for children to have reflection in the classroom, but it doesn't seem as important for Black children to have Black teachers and education, Black representation, right? There are always excuses why it can't happen or why a person has to wait, where other people are parachuted up, right? It's like, is it a priority? Right? And I think that it's the only way that things will change and get better is by holding people accountable. And currently, I don't see that happening to the degree that it should.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see if we can bring Tiki into the conversation. Are you there, Tiki?
I am here.
Awesome. Okay. We just wanted to include you as well. I just want to begin by asking you. I mean, you began working in schools as a solo performing artist educator in the 90s, 1990. And this was actually after 20 years as a professional singer, dancer, song stylist, and singer pianist for public adult audiences. So, what motivated you to make that shift from being a performer for public audiences to being an artist educator?
Well, to a certain extent, I had been doing that all along. Way, way back when there was the Library of Black People's Heritage in Toronto, under excuse me, Jean was Jean Shifley, and it was I forget the other woman's name right now. But there was this library that they had started, and I had started attending from the very beginning, and continued to read. I was fortunate that my grandfather, who was a Marcus Garveyite, had taken me under his wing from when I was born. And so he had spent a lot of time with me. He taught me a lot of things. And to the point where when I was in grade 8 going into grade 9, the library had 3 speakers that they had tested and honed and made sure that we knew our stuff. And I was one of those 3 at that age that could go out and teach certain aspects of African-centered history. So I was focusing on Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. So from an early age, I always had that interest, but it was always kept separate from the music. Okay. So I was doing things along those lines, not so much again for children, although it would often be youth my age, right? But I was paid to go into high schools and do things. So fast forward, it was into the late 80s that my son would come home, and he and his friends would give a synopsis of the performing artist who had been in their school that day. And they were absolutely devastating. I mean, I thought that they were exaggerating at how bad it was. And so I said, the next time that there's someone there, give me a call and I'll come over and I'll watch the performance. And they didn't exaggerate. It was really awful. And one of the main things I found was that they were putting in performers who really were specializing in kindergarten to grade 3. And here they are now in middle school and they're saying, yeah, this is good for you too. And of course, I remember back to when I was in middle school, there's a lot of things I really wanted to know. There were things I wanted to understand. There were questions I had, which often the teachers never wanted to answer, never wanted to deal with. So I had been wanting to do more meaningful things that was connected to my profession. And I also wanted to get away from working in bars all the time. Quite frankly, it became really tiresome being, competing with alcohol and everything else that goes on in there. So I devised a show that was actually an African-centered history lesson starting from 10,000 BCE to about the turn of the last century. But I framed it as though it was all about gospel music. It was actually called Lift Every Voice and Sing, the roots of gospel music. So it was about spirituals, it was about resistance music. I wanted to get in really meaningful and meaty things for the kids, because the little bit that I saw of Black history things were somewhat shallow and kind of superficial. And I'm not saying that's necessarily the artist's fault. I learned very quickly that there is a lot of resistance to having, to celebrating Black History Month, still is, right? So that is what got me into it, was to find something that would keep the children of my son's age, answer their questions, deal with topics that a lot of the teachers either did not want to or did not know how to deal with. Okay, so that's how I got into it. And after having, it was challenging at first because the show was between 45 minutes and an hour, which was a bit longer than most people were doing. And I kept being told by the teachers that the students just could not sit that long. And I said, I don't think they're going to have a problem. No, they can't sit that long. And they would apologize beforehand. They're going to walk out. They're going to be too restless, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I didn't have any problems, and a lot of it is the fact that I came from a background where, do you remember a movie called Roadhouse with, what's his name? Patrick Swayze, I think it was. And no, was it Patrick? Yeah, I think so. Anyways, it's this Roadhouse. There's a scene in there where the band is playing in this bar, and they're behind chicken wire because there's so many bottles being thrown and there's so many fights and projectiles, etc. Right? I went through that. I paid my dues playing those kinds of gigs, right? Where you've got 2 inches of peanut shells on the floor and a whole lot of blood. So I really didn't think the kids could do anything to me, which is a little bit different than a lot of the people who went into work as artists for kids, right? And the fact that also I did not put a limit on the number of children the teachers wanted. I left it up to them to decide if they felt the kids and if they could handle them and what have you. So I would go in and I would do 2,000 kids at a sitting, do the whole school. It wasn't a problem for me. And the question and answering, of course, I always had a question and answer period that would always be very interesting. And the reaction of the teachers was also interesting. And when I went in to do double shows, so I would do one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and I was having lunch with the teachers, sometimes that was the most endarkening, as I call it. What came out of their mouths and how I saw them act. Yeah, it was just like when I was in school.
Well, I know for myself too. I mean, even now, when if I'm in a school and I sit in the staff room to have my lunch, I'm often surprised at some of the things that I hear the teachers say,
Mhm.
the kind of um, the inferred kind of attitude towards certain children when they speak
Yes,
about them.
yeah.
So I think in the 90s, I don't know if you would agree, the 90s was I think a pivotal time in Toronto for Black activism in the arts and the education sectors.
I
Um,
think so.
yeah, I remember like the heritage language and the anti-racism curriculum was being introduced under the banner of multiculturalism.
Mhm.
And a lot of socially engaged Black artists who were experiencing barriers in their artistic fields of endeavor would turn to education as an avenue to do creative work and, make change and in the Black community. Was that part of your impetus as well? Of when did you? How do you feel that what you brought to the education system at that time was being received? Other than those comments you made about the comments in the staff room, do you have? Could you say more about that?
I generally found that I was received very well because um, yeah, overall I was received very well. There would be some teachers that would sort of push against it, primarily because the stance that I had was something that many of them were not familiar with. So there would sometimes be a little bit of pushback, and it could start as early as they would I would come out and they would say to the students, here's Tiki, and I would have to correct them, and it's usually often for the second time, because if they've introduced me to a child in the office who's going to take me down the hall to wherever, and they'll say, take Tiki, and I have to correct them and tell them, no, I'm Ms. Mercury Clark, right? Or you can call me Ms. Tiki, but we are not on a first name basis.
I
And
know.
and I would say to them, do your students call you by your first name? Right. So, you run into that sort of thing, right? Um, but generally speaking, I have to say it was very welcoming, and a lot of the teachers were surprised at the density of what I was doing. My shows, I write um, for the information as well as the artistic aspect, but I deliberately craft them so they can be used as a seminar at conferences, and they are. And so I could do it for adults, and they would sit and they would write pages and pages of notes on what I'm talking about. Or you can sit back and you can watch it as entertainment. But you can tell from the questions and answer, the questions that I got, that a lot of the students were very interested and very curious. But again, as I said, it conflicted sometimes with teachers, because they have their own agenda. And a lot of times, particularly certain topics like the issue of Canada having been an enslaving nation, they're not really comfortable with that. And a lot of them had left that information out or downplayed it so much, it was something that was almost negligible, right? And I didn't approach it that way. I approached it as being a fundamental part of who Canada is. And I also explained that the Underground Railroad didn't just run north into Canada, it also ran from Canada to the northern United States, which had abolished enslavement before Canada did, right? And things like that, I would sometimes get pushback about. But again, it's a matter of sort of standing your territory, with certain teachers who are trying to undermine what you're saying. So, I can remember one time that it wasn't the first time a teacher said it, but this particular teacher was quite adamant to try to get me to agree with her. And she was saying that she first of all wanted to interrupt the students who were asking questions. And I explained that I really wanted the students to be able to get in their questions, so I'll take your question last, right? And so she didn't like that, but she waited. And then she said, okay, I have a problem with your saying that Canada had slavery. She said, because Canada wasn't Canada until 1867, and slavery ended in 1834. So you can't say that Canada had slavery. I said, oh, I said, are you a history teacher? And she says, yeah. I said, oh, okay, great. And I said, where do you start? And she started talking about, well, we deal with, John Cabot and the Courrier de Bois and all these other people. And I said, but that was before 1867. So why are you, that's not part of Canada's history, you know? You can't do that. And to point out that her logic was so flawed, because if you're going to take that perspective, you also cannot say with pride that Canada was involved in the Underground Railroad, because that was before 1867.
True,
Okay.
true.
So yeah, it was, sort of that sort of thing. But I had schools that I would go back to every other year regularly, right, through the 90s. And they would recommend me to others as well. And it was the teachers themselves who expanded the width and the breadth of the performance. I wrote it for middle schools. I marketed it as middle schools, but it was the teachers themselves who would call other teachers who were in elementary school or who were in high school. So by the mid 90s, I was doing from kindergarten up to grade 13 back then, and university, but I mean, in terms of the regular school system. It was a time, it was an opening where there seemed to be a more genuine attempt to bring in some African history or African-centered history. And I have no doubt a lot of the teachers were sincere about that. But you still always get to a wall at a certain point where what really needs to be taught for our children, right, is going to go up against what the basic cultural values of Western culture is. And I don't have any illusions that our children, honestly, our children can ever get well educated in this school system without some kind of additional things that we do as a community for them. I just can't see how that can happen. I think that the culture is fundamentally based on the fantasy of white supremacy. And it's not going anywhere anytime soon. And I think that there is a certain biological basis to that pathology. So it's not something that's going to be easily rooted out. If you're happy with our children assimilating into Western culture and becoming more Europeanized and moving away from being African-centered, we'll flounder, we'll handle it. We can still be there, but I want us to be able to properly thrive. I want us to be able to become fully who we are. And the fact of the matter is, we can do things in ways that nobody else can. And that won't happen if we keep sending our children to be educated by people who are at war against us.
And I'd also like to add, if I may, that you have a lot of educators that are coming into our system that are racialized people, but they get souped up in like, oh, these are non-white people, so all is well, right? Kumbaya. And it's not, because we have to also realize that we have other cultures that are very anti-Black, that are also teaching our kids, right? And that's, I would say, the elephant in the room with education, because they think by virtue of the fact the person is racialized, that means they cannot do harm and trauma to our kids. And this could be nothing further from the truth. I think that we have a lot of good people doing a lot of good work, but the good people with the will to do the work, what supports are they getting when they hit these roadblocks, right? When they call out the anti-Black racism against our children, right? And again, I always say the further removed from the classroom, it appears to be the further removed a lot of individuals are to real concrete solutions, and seeing how things are landing at the student's desk, right? Seeing in the classroom the environment that the students are in. And, a lot of boards, you'd see that, oh, they have these good news stories and look at us, we're doing such great things. But they're ignoring that you have a vast majority of students may not be able to identify with these good news stories that you are saying about. And who are the people that are in these good news stories that are thriving within your boards, right? So I think that it is it's almost, hidden. And I always say with educationalese, they can literally explain away and justify a lot of their actions, what they're doing. And to me, when you still peel away all the layers, all the explanations, right, you realize, and you call out the hypocrisy, like TK said, with regards to the lady objecting, the educator objecting, that, oh, Canada wasn't even a country when it's formed. Why are you saying that we participated in slavery, right? And these are it's almost semantics, right?
Yeah.
And you have to be, and I always say, beat them at their own game, because they are coming to justify. And that is why I like when an amazing scholar, Natasha Henry, always said the system was not designed by us or for us, right? It was actually designed with against us.
Yes. Yeah.
And really nothing much has changed substantially in the whole systemness. If you look at the legal, boards would spend money, hundreds and thousands of dollars, because they know they can out legal regular parent, right? And they would spend money to uphold their racist practices and so defend unions, right? You look at even so many times too, and they settle at, some lawyers will boast and say, oh, we have never lost a case. But what do? They drag out, because they know they have enough funding until they get parents to sign. And when you sign away and settle, what they do, they muzzle you because you sign a non-disclosure agreement. So all this case has disappeared. It was all over the news, but all of a sudden it's gone quiet, and now parents can't see anything. And people may fault the parent to say, well, why did you sign? But sometimes it's so frustrating, it's so emotionally draining, that you just said, you know what, I'll just take this money and be done with it. And and that's one of the keys in how they continue to perpetuate, because then you can say, oh, we have never lost a case, we have never been charged or been reprimanded for being anti-Black, and but we don't know what they have admitted to behind closed doors, what has been signed off on, right? And I think
that's very Canadian.
Yeah.
That's very Canadian, that they won't put into paper blatantly what they do, but there would be a social practice of doing it anyway. So, de facto, it actually did go on, and you mentioned some things there that, that were important. And it basically really, to a certain extent, though, comes out to, I don't think most of us really understand white supremacy, what it is, how it works, because you see these patterns. If you really understand it, you can foretell what is going to happen because it's happened before. That whole influx of some darker people than Mzungu, but not as dark as us or what have you, coming in now. That's really no different than what happened at the end of enslavement, when in a lot of the Caribbean countries you had Chinese brought in, you had Indians brought in, et cetera, to form a buffer class, right? And they identify quite often with the oppressors, right, rather than with us, right? So, these things are something that a lot of parents themselves and anyone else who's trying to improve the educational system, we're floundering. And I find that what happens in European-based cultures, in particular, it's an interesting thing that just occurred to me a couple of days ago. How come we don't refer to the people in Canada and New Zealand and Australia as the European diaspora?
Yeah.
It's kind of weird. But anyways, I digress. Sometimes we have to look, for me, at constructive disengagement. Okay. We cannot, if you understand the school systems are designed by people to replicate their culture and replicate their society. And it is designed for some people to be trained to have power and use it, and other people to be powerless. They're being trained to be powerless, right? And you can have the exact same training going on to two different groups because the impact is going to be different, right? As long as we keep sending our children to these schools that are ill-equipped to actually deal with them, well, they don't want to, not just ill-equipped, but they are ill-equipped, to deal with our children fairly. And we're sending our children and we're asking parents in a very competitive kind of culture to train our children to be a competitor against their children for jobs at the end of the schooling cycle, right? The education cycle. It's crazy. It's not going to happen. They're not going to want to give them the things that they need, and some things they can't. So one of the things, for example, we don't know enough about ourselves. And from the ancient times, we were told, know yourself, and this is an important thing. One of the things that many of us don't realize, and certainly the vast majority of European-based teachers don't know, although they may suspect, is that our children develop faster between birth and puberty than any other children. That's just a simple fact. It's a blessing of melanin, I guess, to a certain extent. It sort of evens out once you get to around 12 or 13, but until then, we can be taught to read before anybody else, print, write, if they're going to bother to keep that skill. Everything we can have sooner, just simply because of how the neurons have developed and what goes on with our children. So when you have that situation and we send our children to schools, especially in the elementary grades, when most of the teachers are white women, they know about raising white children. And they know that at a certain age, they're supposed to have naps. And our children have outgrown naps. Our children need to have more stimulation. They need more depth than the school is going to give them. And when they're bored, then they're going to want to be up and doing things. And of course, they are going to get called, told that they have some kind of attention deficit disorder, when in actual fact, they're just not being stimulated the way they need. It's also a case that our children's lean muscles develop faster. And one of the things that is necessary to feel comfortable with that is actually more physical movement. Okay, I don't think it's an accident that much of in traditional Africa, they were outside, right, and having school in those in an outdoor situation where they could do a lot of physical things. When you have children, I don't remember back to when I was 5 and 6 years old, but I do remember going into my teens when you go through another stage of your lean muscles developing. And it was at times quite painful. It was almost like an itch at times that you couldn't scratch. You really needed to stretch. You really needed to move. You needed to do things. And our kids go through that. And when you're having teachers who, as far as they're concerned, you should be just laying down there, or they're moving, much faster than the other kids, and their mind is moving much faster, they completely misinterpret it.
So I mean, within the system that our children are in, certainly, we could have a conversation about revolution as opposed to reform, tear down the system and build a new system for our Black children. And that, we do have an Afrocentric alternative school in the Toronto District School Board, which may be serving the Black children, much more effectively than other schools. But within the boards of education, the Toronto District School Board, the Peel District School Board, where you are, Kathy, what can we do within the system that can nurture Black children? There's a term, culturally responsive curriculum, culturally relevant curriculum, that has become popularized in, I would say, the last 5 to 10 years. Do you think that that's a relevant strategy in confronting anti-Black racism in the education system? And when I say, and I'll just describe, when I say culturally responsive curriculum, I mean specifically curriculum that, for Black culturally responsive curriculum, it would be curriculum that incorporates elements of African, Black, and Caribbean cultural and racial identities and knowledges, that acknowledges African, Black, and Caribbean contributions to society, and encourages intercultural exchange and respect. Do you feel, Kathy, that this is a valid strategy in addressing anti-Black racism in the education system?
Absolutely, I do. And I think there are 3 sort of methods or strategies that I talk about. So I'll start first within the school, since you spoke about the curriculum, because when you learn about other cultures, the more you know, the more you grow. And when you look at history, what we're currently in a lot of boards teaching children is European history. We're not teaching true Canadian history, because there's Black history, there's Indigenous history, right? There even the history of new immigrants coming. So our history is so multidimensional, and it's crucial that all the students that enter, not only Black children, because I don't think only Black people should learn about Black history, because I would like to even debunk the whole notion of Black history, because I think it's Canadian history that we're talking about. And I think our students should be taught true Canadian history. I look at a child my second child, who went to school in a gifted class and being told they didn't know that Black people were smart. And these are young people, Canadian kids, right, that have gone up until grade 7, middle school, so it's grade 6, not knowing that Black people were smart. And I think that's an abject failure on the part of our education system. If you can have students that you are putting through a system that think that somehow Black people are inferior and we aren't smart enough to be in certain arenas, right? And I think that alone speaks for the necessity of Black history being incorporated into everything we do. Math, English, not only history, because when they talk about Pythagoras' theorem, for example, we learn that in math. Really, is Pythagoras' theorem really Pythagoras' theorem to start, when there are so many evidences of his so-called theorem being in Africa? It was actually also in the Indian continent before it reached Europe. So you have a concept that was taken from the African continent and a European brought it to Europe and it suddenly becomes his theorem, right? So these are the things and discussions that need to be occurring in schools. We look at, I know invariably when I go into schools and I'm talking to kids, I tell them, your parents are using so much technologies that Black people have invented just to get to school, be it your GPS system, the traffic light, some of them are in the car using Team or Zoom, the VoIP technology. These are Black people's inventions. But somehow you have other groups of people that are like, oh, they're the great scientists and IT people, right? When so much of the technology that the world relies on now are here as a result of the brilliance of Black people. We look at medical research, and I could go on and on and on, and that's why it needs to be incorporated within everything. I look at within boards, there need to be mechanisms for holding people accountable, not only having policies that have no teeth, right? And allowing staff and students to feel safe that they can report. I think people like the OCT, right? Right now, there is a zero tolerance for sexual assault and molestation. And I would argue that racism is just as traumatic, right? Try living as an oppressed person, right? All your life as you enter a learning institution, right? And don't tell me, and I'm not trivializing a child being molested, but don't trivialize either children that are experiencing racial trauma every day. And we're not asking for something we're not entitled to, right? It's our right to get an education. So I think we need to sort of frame the language and use stronger language. It should be absolutely mandatory that just how you revoke someone's license immediately, and the minister went all the way back, is retroactive. If you have been convicted, your license, even before that came, your license will be revoked by OCT. I think the same kind of attitudes need to shift when it comes to anti-Black racism, calling the kid the N-word, monkeys, right? An educator. I think these are some of the things that we need to ensure. We need to hold boards and, even the Human Rights Tribunal, right? Had the Human Rights Tribunal had cases where people are saying themselves, right? You have a tribunal that's supposed to be upholding rights and are having complaints against them. We need to really take the whole concept of human rights seriously, because it's so hard, even I as a trustee, trying to get justice, right, for my own human rights as a Black woman, upholding and fighting for the rights of Black children, right? You'd be surprised to know that as a trustee, I really have no rights under the Ontario Human Rights Code, because I'm not an employee of the board. So the racism that can be heaped upon me can continue because I'm not an employee of the board. I think that's a travesty. I think that we have to look at, if you look at other community groups, or in the US, I like Ben Crump, right? We need more Ben Crumps. We need lawyers. We need people in our community to step up and start taking to task these institutions. And we're focusing on education because that's all my brain can focus on is education, right? Is taking education boards to task and suing them, because until it becomes financially unsustainable to be assaulting our kids, right? They will continue to do so because people pay attention, politicians pay attention to money, right? If you keep losing money and these tens and millions, people will start to pay attention, right? And I think we also have to make sure, in terms of the parent piece, our parents need to form networks. We need to get supports. And we can't just, I know it's not easy. And I know a lot of parents are working and in the grind, but at some point we have to hold people, especially elected people, accountable. I tell people the first way of holding people accountable is simply voting. There are too many of our Black parents that don't vote. They don't even know who their trustee is. And as a trustee, I'm in charge of over $2 billion budget. I'm making decisions that's affecting your children. You should care if you have a trustee that's abusing their power or doing nothing for their children. And also, make no mistake, you can't just assume because somebody has black skin that they have your best interest of heart. You have to pay attention, right? And stop electing. You have trustees that have been there for decades that are doing more harm than good to children. But we vote for them because they're black, or we're not paying attention, or we don't vote at all. So they keep getting in. I also think that in terms of the public, we need to make sure that our parents are educated and know their rights. And that is where it comes to community groups, right? And as parents too, we can't just sit back and think that the school system is sufficiently going to educate our children. And there's a plethora of programs, and a lot of these programs are free. We have to do our homework, right? But we need to invest in making sure, I say it like a suit of armor. We have to arm our kids, and this is like battle, right? And I know people, I might get criticized for saying that, but we're literally preparing our kids for battle each and every day when we send them out to get an education. So as parents, you literally have to put on that suit of armor on your kids, reaffirm them, self-reaffirmations, affirmation, sorry. Because, every day I have posters through my house and I'd say, write up little affirmation for my kids, you're great, you're amazing, you're the best of the best. And my kids can tell you, and they can say these things because they need this suit of armor. So when people are poking at them, right? Hopefully your armor is thick enough that when you come home, you can plug all the holes and build them up for another day. And I think as parents, we also have to look at how we speak to our kids, the language, that we use to our kids. And because a lot of times too, we're told like, oh, just ignore it. You never, ever tell your children to ignore racism, right? It's traumatic for them and we need to call it out, right? And if you can't do it, find someone who will. As a trustee, I have helped people from as far as Simcoe, anything, north, south, east, west. You call me, find your trustee if you're not getting help, but don't tell children to ignore the trauma that they're experiencing, right? And hold them accountable. Don't let things slide because, we have an expression in Jamaica, say you slip, you slide, right? Because if you keep ignoring these little, and people, I don't believe in microaggressions. I think it's all macro. They know exactly what they're doing, right? And I call it out. I know it might not be popular. People, I didn't think about it. But how can you see every other kid, you give every kid a high five except in the black kid and you go, oh, you weren't aware? That's not no micro. You know exactly what you're doing, right? And I think that we need to stop soften it down and, putting it in a nice bow to make people feel comfortable and meeting everybody where they're at, right? And it's like, this is what needs to be done, because if you commit a crime against a child, like sexually molest a child, we're not going to say we're going to meet you where you're at. We just don't tolerate it as a society. So are we tolerating racial trauma and saying we're going to meet, you where you're at? I'm sorry. To me, you should know better as an adult. You're an educator, right? And the other thing is the actual education that teachers receive. I think that needs to be overhauled. I think just like how you have to go back and do some upgrading certain things to maintain your OCT, your Ontario Colleges of Teachers license to teach in this board, I think anti-Black racism should be one of those modules that you need to do, and not a recording that you do on a computer that people can just turn off, run away, come back when it's done and put check. It should be an in-person, because you're dealing with people's lives, right? You can severely break children, right? You have 12-year-olds, 10-year-olds that are cutting, that are thinking of suicide because of racial violence, right? And I think, and because, one of the things I'm told, but suicide rates are not very high among our Black youth as compared to other equity-seeking groups. does it take the death of our children and they see this so-called resilience as a badge of honor? I don't think it's a badge of honor.
I
And
don't
I
think
think it's time we
it's
call it
interpreted.
out. Yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say,
Yeah.
I don't think that it's even interpreted properly,
Yeah.
because the idea that, when they say that suicide rates are lower with us, well, it's just, I consider it fast suicide. Slow one, where you're taking drugs or you're drinking alcohol or you're doing harmful things to you on a constant way that is actually destroying you, just slower, is the same thing. And we manifest it a little differently, but it really isn't the case that it's somehow insignificant levels in our community. I agree with a lot of what you say, but I, from the things that I've experienced in the school system and in this society, and what I've studied for a very long time, I don't think, I don't want us to waste a whole lot of time trying to be the ones to try to re-educate white people. I don't think it's our job. I think that's something that white people need to do. We have to spend, if we try to do that, we are spending an incredible amount of energy first, just to get them to listen to us and believe us. Because if they have the corollary of white supremacy, which is Black inferiority, if they have that in their head, they're not going to respect what we have to say or believe what we have to say. So we're expending all our energy just trying to get them to the point where they may be somewhat neutral and then able to be dealt with. So as far as I'm concerned, I think we spend enough centuries trying to deal with that we can just let white people take care of that. But I definitely believe in constructive disengagement. Those areas, there's some key areas that we have to make sure that we really have more control. I'm not under any illusion, though. It's not that we can all take our children out of the school system. But what I'm talking about is I want to see us, and I think we really need, as a community, to come together and protect our children, and just as Kathy was saying, you have to put on this suit of armor, and you have to understand that you can't let things slide. My heart breaks when I read accounts or hear parents crying about, my child has been abused at school, and we went to the principal, and we went to this trustee or to that person, and we're not getting any satisfaction. But they'll say something like, and I teach my child to turn the other cheek, and I'm like, oh, my heart just breaks for that, because that's not how you can deal with it. That's not how you deal with it. What you're going to be doing is stripping away your child's sense of agency, their child, the child being able to respond properly. So what I think is what the things that are needed is, ideally, if we could have enough independent schools. And when I say that, I'm not saying it necessarily has to be in designated buildings, in terms of, an edifice with a name on it and what have you. These are things that we have done in the past, where we can gather in homes. We have parents coming together, paying the salary of a teacher, and having students learn, as many as possible, staying out of the school system K-8. That to me would be ideal, not going to their schools until grade 9. By that time, the vaccination, as I call it, of African-centered thinking, right, is strong enough in them that they can handle more of what's going to happen in high school. If we can't do that, well, then can we at least get an after-school program for a couple of hours after school, where they are debriefed from the nonsense that they are taught throughout those 6 hours beforehand, right? And probably a day on Saturday as well. I mean, there are things that we can do that we really need to do, because I'm a little concerned about the new mandate to have African-centered components in the school system. Who is going to be in charge of it? Without getting into a lot of detail,
For,
I
yeah,
was
grade 7, 10, and
Mhm,
11. I think there are 3 grades
mhm.
in the upper grades where
Yeah.
in
Who's
2025.
writing it though? Because I was at a gathering of educators who were intent on, and they were looking from years ago for this moment and preparing for this moment. And they were not us that are looking to control this curriculum and how it's going to be taught. And I remember it got quite heated because there was an obviously stated concern, their main concern, and why they wanted to have control of the information is they wanted to make sure that white children were not made to feel guilty.
Mm,
Excuse me. That was the first thing and the main thing that they were interested in.
mhm, mhm.
So when you have, for example, a and they keep talking about contributions to society, right?
Right.
Make sure that our contributions to society.
Yeah.
That doesn't mean they're going to talk about the fact that we invented writing, math, uh, algebra, excuse me, and things of this nature.
Mhm,
They're going to be focusing on our still being their servants and building up their society,
mm,
contributing to that. These were the good darkies who did good and built up this society, right,
mm,
or Western society in general. They're not going to be extolling our freedom fighters, right? They're not going to be placing our fight for our rights as furthering the democracy of Canada, for example. They're not going to frame it that way. Their contributions are going to be about us, are going to be from their perspective.
mhm,
And you have to be careful as well, because I have seen how historically, in order to maintain that same lie of white supremacy, what will happen is the stereotype will just be tweaked a bit. Back in whatever, I forget what years it was before Jackie Robinson, what have you, the excuse that was always given as to why Black people could not play professional baseball, for example, was because it was said that we just didn't have the kind of quick thinking and we didn't have that kind of agility. The white ball players were like the Arabian racehorse. Well, we were the Clydesdales. We were good for the brute force thing, but baseball, you have to be able to think in terms of who's on what base and, knowing how far back you have to go to catch a ball, all these different things, sort of triangulating in your mind and what have you, right?
Now,
Well,
TK, I can say with regards to the curriculum, as someone who has been at the tables in terms of the ministry and how it's going to roll out, that the minister has committed to ensuring that there's community consultation, teachers, educate, and not only people that are in the field now, but because this, the request for this has been going on for decades before it was actually announced.
yes.
So we're
And
going to
we've
have
had that,
some
and
of
we,
the old guards that are going to be there too. And it's going
Mhm,
to be bipartisan. It's not only going to be like a PC. So I think it's going to be a thorough dive. And I am hopeful because let me tell you, without hope, you can't
mhm.
do this work. So I'm hopeful that there is going to be a broad spectrum, a very diverse group of Black individuals that are going to be working on the curriculum.
Oh, I'm sure there will be, but we'll see. But I still say that they're not going to go against their basic fundamental cultural view. They can't. It's just it's suicidal to do that. They depend absolutely on the dynamic of their controlling us and the dynamic that we are less than them. They want to paint it nicer, but it's not going to fundamentally change. But I just like to finish the thought that I was getting at, where there was this in baseball, there was this stereotype of how we were, right, and why we couldn't be in professional baseball. Well, when Jackie Robinson, he didn't break anything. He was placed in there, actually. When Jackie Robinson came along and all the other ball players, and they actually destroyed the Negro Leagues, which was a whole other thing. I think we lost more than we actually gained. The stereotype changed. It wasn't that, oh, maybe I was wrong in what I was thinking, that we were actually smarter and we were able to do things. No, now it became, we are just natural athletes. We're born with it. You know, we don't have to think about it. It's just no different than other, than other animals, because they thought of us as animals, that we had these capabilities. You find the same thing about music and different arts, where you will have, some mediocre person who is of European descent, who's viewed as being more extraordinary than one of us, because the idea is, well, we're just born singing, right? We're just born singing. So it's not something we have to work at. It's not something that we practice, and, that's it. I'm not, I don't disagree with a lot of what you said, Kathy, and I understand being hopeful. I am very hopeful. I'm very hopeful with what I see happening in this world right now, and the awakening that I see in Africa, and the awakening that I see amongst a lot of our youth. It's what's needed. They're finally getting some of the information that is necessary for them to make fundamental changes. And I've, I think that as more and more of us really understand that, more and more of us are going to start doing the kinds of things that I'm talking about. Because it was something that was done before. We used to have Saturday classes all the time. We used to have groups that would get together and after school. And that's where a lot of things were taught. There were communiversities, and we need that, because that is the way every other group, if you want to make sure that your children are going to get an education that buttresses them, that gives them wings to fly, that really has them thrive and feel good about themselves, you have to be in control of it. You have to be able to give the information, and there's inside information every group has. It's a natural thing, even if it's in terms of the rich. The information they pass around the dinner table is something that you and I are not going to get. Other groups, they want to make sure their children know their heritage and feel comfortable about it. They have their own schools, or they have their own classes, and they make it a point of supporting them. That's not being un-Canadian by any means. It's, to me, it's just being honest and accepting the way things are. The stories I could tell you, and I'm not going to get into it, I don't know how much time we have. The stories I could tell you of my experiences in school, because when I went to school, it was at a time when Canadians didn't really necessarily try to hide how they felt. We used to joke about having our own reserved seats on streetcars and buses, because if you were a Black person and you sat in a seat that sat more than one, you sat alone. It didn't matter how packed that vehicle got, you sat alone. We also faced, if we sat in the front, although there was never any laws here saying that we shouldn't sit in the front, but there would be plenty of people that would tell you should be in the back. I've been spat on by adults telling me I should be in the back. I remember going to my first day of school, which was in November, because when we bought our house in grade 5, and walking up to the classroom and the teacher saying, oh dear. And they said the N-word. And said it out loud, like she was just making a regular comment. That kind of thing. In grade 1, I was denied the right to use the toilet in the school or to get drinks of water from the fountains. And it happened that year we had a very, very, really tough heat wave. And I can remember almost passing out many times. And those are minor things. I could tell you worse. So I know what the school system is like. I know the games that are played. And I guess that's why I have a sort of take no prisoners attitude.
Yeah, and your views are very, very clear and very strong, and it's you know, very important to reflect on these ideas, because it is like a battlefield there out there for our children in the education system.
And we've had it a long
I'm gonna have
time.
to wrap it up. We're at the end of our time now, and it's been a very informative and rich conversation that we've had today, talking with our two esteemed panelists, artist and educator Tiki Mercury Clark and school trustee Kathy McDonald, who have brought a wealth of knowledge and experience to the topic from their long-standing dedication to education and to nurturing Black children. We have spoken about overhauling teachers' education. We've talked about accountability measures, parent networks and education and rights in advocating for their children. We've talked about anti-racism being recognized as a human rights violation, and that change would happen if it was taken up at that level. We've talked about culturally responsive curriculum, constructive disengagement, independent schools where Black children can learn from K to 8 from Black teachers within an African diasporic educational framework. So I think that, you know, there's much to think about in this conversation that we've had today. I would have loved to give you each one last moment to say a final word, but we are out of time. But I thank you both immensely for your passionate views on the topic. I want to also thank our audience for joining us. This Fireside Chat will be available for viewing on the 100 ABC Women's website soon. My name is Mosa McNeely, and thank you for your interest in the groundbreaking work of accomplished Black women in Canada. Thank you.
Thank you, Mosa. You did a great job.
Look how far you have come on your own, but never alone. Through the rain and through the shine, here's your moment, it's your time. You stood tall and now you see, standing in your destiny. 100